Our first fire is the Teepee fire lay. It's one of the fastest and easiest fires to build. It gives off nice high flames, so if you're sitting above the fire level, you'll feel that warmth, and is incredibly easy to maintain. Here's how to make it. We start by building a tinder bundle, which for me consists of birch bark and toothpick-sized twigs. Slicing thin curls on a stick like this is called feathering, and makes some great kindling for the heart of your fire. To make the main structure, you just balance sticks up against one another, just kind of lean them in a teepee shape, and that's really all there is to it. Just make sure there's enough spacing for ventilation, or else your fire is going to smother out before it catches on. Light this one from the bottom up, that heat is going to rise, and ignite this one actually really quick. I started an official timer at this point to compare all 3 of the fires. I wanted to look at how long it really took to get going, when maintenance was required, when did the fire collapse down, and the quality of cooking coals or a water boil test. So taking a look at the thermal camera now, we could really see how this fire contains the heat to the center, and it's like a protection from the elements as it builds up. But there's a trade-off. That tinder bundle in the middle is so protected that it may burn out entirely before the fire fully catches on. Under the thermal camera, we could see that the heat is there and it is building. But this is a point where a campfire like this requires a bit of maintenance, but it's not much, just a little bit of rearranging and maybe a few more pieces of kindling to really get it going. So our initial maintenance on this fire is at about 7 minutes in. And we could see as this fire grows, that heat is going vertical, which is really good if you're sitting up higher, like on a chair or a log, and you want to feel that heat fast. At this point, I headed down to the water to wet one of my big wool socks to see just how well each of the fires would do at drying them out. And when I got back, this fire was really rocking, so we can safely say it was fully involved at about 10 minutes. And with the thermal overlay, we can now see that heat is being produced in pretty much every direction. And now at 14 minutes and 45 seconds, we have our collapse. Now, one thing to note here, though it didn't actually happen in this example, sometimes when a teepee fire does collapse, it'll smother itself completely out. So just something to watch for. Now, I apologize in advance, but the temperature you're about to see here is in degrees Celsius. So if you don't quite know the conversion, don't worry, you can still see the relative heat distribution. So the back of the rocks are fairly cold, but the front are really starting to absorb some heat, especially up high. With this type of fire, the ground level is not going to be as hot as the higher levels, and the wool sock is going to absorb heat the fastest, and it looks to be drying off nicely. At about 24 minutes of burn time, we've reached some really good cooking coals. So to test their quality, I filled up about 2 cups of water in a titanium pot and set it directly on those coals. With a good amount of heat still condensed in that center, it took exactly 7 minutes and 30 seconds for the 2 cups of water to boil. I pulled the sock off as well, and it seemed pretty dry, so I was pretty happy with it. So I'll save my thoughts on this fire until we can see how the other 2 compare. But I'll first show you what steps I took to make this as fair of a comparison as I can manage. I first harvested all the wood from the exact same tree. Then I split all the logs into as equal sized pieces as I could manage, divvied them up into 3 equal piles. I then weighed the piles, added exactly 1 pack pouch worth of birch bark for each one, and even used a moisture meter to make sure the moisture content was pretty even for each of the stacks. Okay, so the next fire we're taking a look at is called the log cabin fire. It's known to be smooth and steady without any large collapses, has a very even heat distribution, and requires a little bit less maintenance. All reasons why this might be the second most popular fire lay out there, and is only slightly more difficult to master than the teepee fire. Here's how to make it. Start with your tinder bundle in the middle, exactly the same as how we made the teepee fire. Stack a bit of kindling on there just to make sure there's going to be fuel in the middle to get the whole thing going. Now we're going to form the structure, which is a base of 4 fuel logs, and you're just going to keep building up and up, stacking just like you would a log cabin, and every layer up is going to be closer and closer to the center. Now, similar to the teepee fire, we're lighting this one from the bottom up. You might find it's a little bit harder to light just because the log cabin frame itself is kind of a barrier from getting that flame into the tinder bundle. As that fire starts going, we could use a time lapse to see how that fire actually spreads. That tinder bundle in the middle has fully engulfed into flames, and now that heat is spreading equally in every direction. Now that we're approaching the 7-minute mark, we could actually see that just like the teepee fire, that center tinder bundle is burned out almost completely. However, because the log cabin fire has this large base at the top, embers, coals, and fuel are going to be constantly falling down, keeping the fire going so you don't have to maintain it at this point. So at around 8 minutes and 30 seconds, this fire is ripping pretty good. And using the thermal, we could see exactly how the heat is distributed in a pretty even way. The wet sock comes in at around the 10-minute mark, and after no no time at all, it's heated up to a significant temperature that we didn't really see with the teepee fire. Now this is primarily because the log cabin fire is keeping the heat lower, whereas the teepee fire disperses that heat in a more vertical fashion. At just shy of 14 minutes, we see our first thing that resembles a collapse, which is just a minute shy but still in the same realm as when the teepee fire collapsed. Now just a note here, the log cabin fire is the one you want to choose if you have kind of an open fire pit or you're using it in a fireplace, just because the teepee fire is prone to sudden collapse and that could end up in a log rolling away. With the log cabin fire, you don't experience that. At about 17 minutes in, my first bout of maintenance is required as the fire is at risk of going out. It doesn't require much, I don't need to add anything to it. I'm just going to gather all the embers into one spot because the outside of the fuel logs aren't really burning. So the teepee fire required some maintenance at around the 7-minute mark and then a little bit more throughout the duration of its burn, whereas the log cabin fire only needed maintenance once at around the 17-minute mark. And now, at almost the exact same time as the teepee fire, we have at 24 minutes some beautiful cooking coals. So we add our 2 cups of water, and right at pretty much the same time for the log cabin and teepee fire, 7 minutes and 30 seconds the water has boiled. And the sock test results in the sock being a little bit more dry than the teepee fire, though it's not that noticeable. So I'll save my thoughts on this one too until we look at the third fire, which is one of my personal favorites. It's the upside down or reverse fire lay, which is a more advanced and lesser known fire because it takes some patience and practice skill to really get it going. But the trade-off is that once it does get going, there is little to no maintenance required, and you'll be rewarded with some of the highest quality cooking coals. Here's how to make it. First, we're going to start with our tinder bundle. Once you have a decent amount, just take it and set it aside for now. Take your largest fuel logs and arrange them in a column across with a little bit of space in between. The next layer will be in a row perpendicular to your first layer. Now we're going to fill the gaps in between with some of the tinder that we set aside. Start to add some kindling as well, some of those feather sticks or little wood chips. That'll help sustain the fire as it builds. Now we build the next layer in a column perpendicular to the one below, and again fill the gaps with both tinder and kindling. To finish this off, we just add a top row, and again, each layer up has smaller sticks as you build. We add a bunch of kindling and tinder to the top now in preparation to light it. And this fire is actually lit from the top down, hence the name the top down or reverse fire. Now this is more of an advanced fire lay because you have to get all the spacing just right and properly fill it with tinder and kindling so it'll light effectively. But additionally, as you're lighting it from the top, that flame is going to be really exposed to wind and the elements, whereas the other fire styles have the tinder bundle protected by the outer structure of the fire. Now looking through the thermal lens, we could see how this fire actually works, which is fairly hard to tell just from watching the fire with your naked eye. The embers form on top and slowly drop to the bottom. And because we have layers of tinder and kindling that we built in as we were stacking the fire up, those are going to help this fire combust from the top, slowly down to the bottom, and then all at once, which maximizes both efficiency and heat because everything's going to ignite at the exact same point. Now for reference, it took 8 whole minutes to get to this stage here, which is just when the fire actually starts to go, and 8 minutes in on the other fires looked something like this. Now at the 10-minute mark, I add the wet sock in, but the fire still really hasn't caught. But then at the 12-minute mark, it is absolutely fully involved. And now throwing on that thermal overlay, we can see the sock is the hottest it has ever been in any of the 3 scenarios. And now moving that temperature monitor all around, we could see that pretty much all the areas, even the ground in front of the fire, are way hotter than the other examples. At 16 minutes and 30 seconds, we could see what is as close to as a collapse as there's going to be with this type of fire. It's very minimal, and the fuel generally just stays together and burns efficiently to the end. And this time lapse just shows how condensed that fuel is. It just stays like this. And it's worth noting that this fire didn't require any maintenance at all. After the initial light, it just slowly burned on its own and turned into this condensed mass of heat, and eventually will turn into the perfect cooking coals. Now it took 26 minutes and 30 seconds to get to the perfect cooking coals, and then took only 5 minutes to boil, which was 2.5 minutes less than the other 2 fires. So now that we've tested all 3 fire lays, I can't definitively say that any one is better than the others. Instead, they all just have their own distinct usages. Starting with the teepee fire, this one I'm going to classify as the social fire. This is such a classic go-to fire because not only is it, in my opinion, the best looking fire, but it's geared towards spreading heat upwards when sitting around a fire socially. And because it requires pretty frequent maintenance, it's easy for anyone in a social setting sitting around a fire to just lay logs and stack them in on that teepee. It's one of the easiest and quickest fires to make. It hits its maximum burn temperature very quickly and overall is one of the best fires you could build. The log cabin fire is one I like to dub the Old Faithful. It's a steady and reliable fire type and honestly just solid in every aspect. It's not hard to build, doesn't require too much maintenance, it looks great, is effective for drying out clothes, and produces a very uniform heat spread. Overall, the log cabin should definitely be part of every camper's skill set. Now the reverse fire might just be my favorite type of fire, and I like to dub it the utility fire. While it does take the most amount of setup and the most amount of skill, and it has a very slow start, it makes up for all of that and more by its ability to be completely maintenance free. That means that I could set up this fire and then go around camp and do some other tasks without having to watch it every single second because I know it won't go out. When I do get back to it, it's gonna have perfect cooking coals left and almost all of that wood has burned very efficiently. Let me know in the comment section below which campfire you like best and why. And if you like this visual style camping tutorial, I think you'd like this video here. This is your friend DJ from the Bare Essentials, and thank you for stopping by.